When it comes to the golden age of animation, there are very few studios that can match the success and notoriety of Warner Brothers. For a time in the 1940s and 50s, it seemed they could do no wrong as they hit home run after home run with each passing Looney Tunes cartoon, whether it featured their classic line of characters or one-offs such as Michigan J. Frog. But that being said, their reign as one of the kings of animation wouldn't last, as by the 1970s they seemed to have lost their touch and made the fatal mistake of trying to move away from their classic Looney Tunes characters that everybody knew and loved. And this lagging behind the other studios would continue into the new millennium, with all of their poor choices culminating in a movie so bad it nearly ruined the animation division of Warner Brothers altogether. And today, while staying objective and sticking only to the facts, I'd like to go over this movie and specifically the history surrounding it. And there will be spoilers for the movie in question ahead, so in case you'd like to see it, you probably shouldn't proceed with this video. Okay, so as I already said, by the 1970s, Warner Brothers had already fallen behind in the animation wars and weren't really able to capitalize on the medium's changing landscape. Instead, they stuck mostly to television and only released what are known as compilation movies in the 1980s, which consisted mostly of a bunch of classic Looney Tunes cartoons stitched together, with some new material added to make it look like there was something of an overarching plot. And only in 1990 did they start committing to releasing original, theatrically animated films. But unfortunately, most of these films were met with failure, excluding the classic live-action animated hybrid film Space Jam. But I already got into that in a separate video, which you can find a link in the description too. Then, by the late 90s, things started really going south for them when Brad Bird made The Iron Giant in 1999. Because as is widely well known, Warner Brothers had no idea how to sell the film because they didn't understand what the movie was supposed to be. And as a result of the disastrous marketing campaign, it ended up flopping at the box office and would take several years for the movie to be rediscovered and hailed as the masterpiece that it was. But immediately following the Iron Giant's financial failure, the animation side of things at Warner Brothers was starting to look more and more like a liability that was simply burning holes in the company's wallet. So they were given just one more chance to turn things around. So Brad Bird pitched an idea about a family of superheroes that would be forced into retirement and then have to rise up to stop an evil threat, while others had a completely different idea. And in quite possibly the biggest mistake they ever made, they went with the other idea and Bird was dropped from the company. So he then went and pitched his idea to Pixar, and I think you can guess what movie resulted from that. But now you might be wondering, what was the idea Warner Brothers chose to go with? Osmosis Jones. The story of an ordinary white blood cell that must save his host from his unhealthy choices by defeating a deadly virus that he's accidentally consumed. This movie was clearly a desperate attempt by Warner Brothers to appeal to a more modern generation of kids. But the combination of extreme gross-out humor in the live-action segments and the buddy cop dynamic in the animated ones didn't prove to be a good combination, and the film ultimately bombed at the box office, grossing only $14 million against a $70 million budget. And after that, the animation division was heavily downsized and used for only one more film, with that being Looney Tunes Back in Action, whose further failure resulted in Warner Brothers shutting down production on animated films entirely and poured all of their animated resources into their TV divisions. Warner Brothers wouldn't release another animated film on a big movie budget again until the Lego Movie in 2014, whose success reignited the studio's animation division on a cinematic scale. But to go back to Osmosis Jones, some might question how much blame it really deserves in all of this. After all, If any of their other movies had done better, things might have turned out differently for it. And all I have to say to that is, do you really think that if they had went with Brad Bird's idea, that events would have still played out the same way? The Incredibles could have single-handedly turned Warner Brothers Animation around and made them a juggernaut in the animation industry had they played their cards correctly, especially when you consider what it ended up doing for Pixar. So while it didn't single-handedly destroy the company, and was more the culmination of a lot of previous mistakes, Osmosis Jones is ultimately what put it away, if only temporarily. Because let's face it, even if Looney Tunes Back in Action had been a success, that wouldn't have been enough to save it at that point and would have only prolonged their inevitable liquidation. Because one also has to keep in mind just how badly the film flopped. Because while The Iron Giant did bomb, at least it still made $31 million against a $50 million budget. Which is still a flop no matter which way you look at it, but a lot more preferable to grossing $14 million against $70 million. Seriously, Osmosis Jones didn't even make back a quarter of its budget. That's how bad it did. So is it really any wonder why Warner Brothers would give up on animated movies after that? They would have been crazy not to. But if the movie had done really well, or more accurately, had they listened to Brad Bird, they never would have scrapped it in a million years. But at the same time, it's also no wonder why audiences weren't interested in seeing the film, because while it does have an interesting concept in theory, it's completely wasted on a plot that's a lot more interested in being as disgusting as possible, and who other than the most immature children would ever be interested in seeing that? Really, if I can just inject my personal opinion in here for a second, I'd find it easier to eat while watching The Thing than Osmosis Jones. But at the same time, the movie does have its moments, specifically in the animated segments, like the scene where Jones gives Drix a motivational speech to try and help save Frank. And, of course, there's Thrax. Seriously, if there is one thing this movie nails, it's the villain. He's the perfect embodiment of what a fatal disease would act like if it were actually sentient. Pure evil and out to cause nothing but misery and death for its own twisted amusement and gain. But unfortunately, its few redeeming qualities aren't enough to take away from the fact that when all is said and done, it's a pretty bad movie. And one that audiences probably didn't have the stomach for at that. It's just not that funny, and the gross out humor doesn't land at all. Now, one would almost think that Osmosis Jones would be more infamous and well known in animation circles considering what it ultimately did to Warner Brothers. But as I said before, in the end, not all the blame can be placed squarely on the film's shoulders, as the animation division had suffered from many bad decisions long before it ever came out, and was more the final nail in the coffin rather than what killed it outright. And not to mention, most would probably argue that it's simply not worth the attention. It's just a bad, unfunny children's film that tries way too hard to please its audience, and thus ends up appealing to no one except the lowest demographic. But either way, the point still remains that Warner Brothers royally screwed up when it came to which film they decided to put their faith in, and the repercussions of that decision are still being felt to this day. So while it's not often remembered as such, Osmosis Jones does hold a pretty significant place in the history of Warner Brothers animation, even if it's as the movie that almost killed it. Okay, I think that ends this little history lesson. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that making Osmosis Jones was one of the worst mistakes ever made by Warner Brothers Animation? Or do you believe that their past failures are to blame for the division being shut down and that the movie unfairly gets a bad rap for it? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And if you happen to absolutely love Osmosis Jones and think that my assessment of its quality was completely inaccurate, That is perfectly okay. You are entitled to your own opinion, and nobody can tell you you're wrong for feeling that way. And thank you all for watching. It is all very much appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.